This presentation is brought to you by the Pacific Division Feeding Leadership. Several housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted tonight on YouTube. The link is in the email you received earlier. You should enter your own hours for this meeting and volunteer connection. Your mic and camera have been disabled due to preserve the bandwidth. If you'd like your questions to be answered by our expert panelists, please enter them in the Q&A section. The chat scrolls too fast and we won't be able to catch the question, but please feel free to use the chat to say hi to each other. Please welcome back Mary and her team. And Mary, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Iwei. And I'm so glad to see many of you who were here last week back again. Love those faces and those initials. Tonight we are talking about the different group activities that feeding works with. And let's start with the first slide. Oh, wait, let me first introduce the people that will be presenting. So we have Chris Hitchcock. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself? And then Angie can?
Sure. I am Chris Hitchcock. I am part of Gold Country. I live in Humboldt County where it is raining cats and dogs at the moment. And I have been sheltering for several years. I am a big proponent of sheltering. I really like it. So I'm happy to be here.
And Angie?
Hello, everyone. I'm Angie Ermer. I'm currently a regional mass care lead for Gold Country Region, and I truly love everything mass care and Red Cross.
Thank you. And for those of you that are new, I'm the Pacific Division Feeding Lead. And I realized last week I did not put my contact information at the end, which is in this PowerPoint presentation, along with Chris and Angie's. So some of you were able to track me down because you had additional questions, which was great. But for the rest of you, it will be in there tonight. Okay, first slide, if you would. Anyway, so a couple things I want you to think about. I believe providing meals is awesome. I love doing it, just like the other ladies that we're talking about love either sheltering or mass care. I love feeding. It's very exciting, but it's a very complex activity, which I really, really, really like the complexity. The most complicated thing that we do in the Red Cross. If you can imagine all of the different aspects of feeding, whether you're in an IRF in the community, whether you're in a fixed site, whether you're in a shelter, whether you're at a headquarters, it's very, very complicated. It is, in my opinion, one of the most expensive things that we do, other than if you consider, some airfares and some hotels. Feeding is expensive, and it requires other groups on the DR to help us. There's a couple other things. Many of you know I either start or I end with some philosophical things. But one of the things that I like best about feeding is that it shares my culture through food. And it shares everyone's culture through food. So if we're serving Italian, people have stories of whether, they had traveled to Italy or if they've, grew up eating pasta often in their families. So it's a cultural experience rather than just a plain eating experience. And if you are in the feeding team, you know this already. It takes time, energy, commitment, and most importantly, flexibility, because oftentimes meals change, people's change, things change constantly. Next slide, please. So here tonight, we start with the food for thought rather than end with it. And as we go through the presentation, I want you to remember just these two things. First of all, we're going to talk about group activity positions, and you'll see them in the slides referred to as gaps. All right, so we're going to be talking about how working with other people in other gaps affects the operation. Other people, sheltering, DES, health and mental health services, they're not just sitting around waiting for us to call on them. They have other things that they're doing. So keep that in mind. Secondly, providing meals at the shelter is just not a solitary activity. It involves a lot of people to get that job done. So, as you're going to hear tonight from our sheltering expertise and our mass care expertise, um, be kind and be patient to our fellow volunteers. Yes, feeding can be very stressful, especially if the meals are late and you have 600 people in line waiting for food. But the best advice I can give you, besides being flexible, is just be kind and be patient. Okay, Chris, do you want to take it over?
Sure. Next. Feeding and sheltering, they go hand in hand. When disaster strikes, it interrupts the two things that we really need most in life, shelter and food. We spend all our energies on finding shelter and food, and until those needs are met, that consumes all of our time. And once these needs are met, then we're able to focus on what we're going to do next. Place to stay and food to eat gives our clients time to plan for their recovery without worrying about where the next food meal will come and where they're going to sleep tonight. They have a place. So how does sheltering help feeding, and how does feeding help sheltering? Next. Feeding SA duties include, but not limited to, setting up the feeding areas for serving food, distributing hand sanitizer, and also encouraging people to wash their hands before meals, counting meals served either by the number of people that go through the line or the number of clamshells that we serve food in, because we need to have an accurate count at the end of the day, how many people ate lunch and how many people ate supper. Also, feeding sets up snack and drink areas, and it's important to set these up for serving items, especially in times when there's a virus going around. We set them up so we can hand each individual drink and we can fix coffee for them. It cuts down on spreading viruses and hopefully keep illness down in the shelter. So helping with the snacks and drinks, if we have feeding essays to help with that, it allows the shelter workers to do other things that they have on their plate. Next. Making coffee, that's the big question. And everybody goes to, how do I make coffee in the coffee machine? What's the right ratio? But it is important that we have coffee. Our clients like to have it. Sometimes they want it in the middle of the night, sometimes during the day. And it's also critical to have it ready in the morning. It'd be really nice if we had a feeding essay overnight, but usually we get them around during the day shifts, and the shelter people have to help in getting the coffee ready. The feeding people also keep track of whether we need supplies such as clamshells. Do we need paper products? Do we need snacks? Are we running out of coffee? What about tea? Have other clients asked for something that we can easily get to go along with snacks and drinks? And then they let the shelter people know what they need so we can order that in a timely fashion. Shelter feeding volunteers also make sure that the food is handled and served safely in all the shelters. That's snacks and meals and other whatever. Next. Shelter workers help feeding by giving them a head count. Feeding needs to know how many meals to plan for the next day, how many lunches, how many dinners, how many people we might need to feed for breakfast. So they help feeding by that. And we also check when people leave for the day to see if they're going to miss a meal, because if they're not going to be back during the meal time, we need to set aside meals for them. When clients check into a shelter, we ask them questions such as, do you have any allergies? Do you have any dietary needs? Are you vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, low sodium, low sugar, halal, kosher, soft, pureed, and other? You'd be surprised how many different kinds of meals you can have for a group of people to fill their needs. And when people are checking in, they do not always tell you everything about their eating. They could be a vegetarian, but they're afraid to tell you they're a vegetarian because they don't want to interrupt the flow of meals. But if we know they're vegetarian, we can handle the meals and provide what they need. We can also provide the meals, or feeding can provide the meals for the different types of diets that they need. So watching people when they're eating their meals to see, are they eating the food that we're serving them or not? And then checking politely to see if it's because they don't like it or is it not part of their diet. And then you get to know the clients a little bit, and that helps in serving the food. Sometimes sack lunches are needed for clients who leave for the day and they go to jobs, and they need a lunch. Uh, so it's so when they check out for the day, it's a good thing to ask them if they're going to be back for the meals, so we know whether or not to set aside meals for those clients. We want to make sure that we have food for them to eat, and we don't serve it all in seconds, and people coming in late still need to eat. The feeding people help with setting up the feeding areas, cleaning the areas, keeping the snacks and coffee all set up, and making sure that it's available and being able to help people whenever they need to have that. Next. So there are a lot of things that overlap between a person who has a feeding gap and one who has a sheltering gap. So if you are interested in getting a feeding gap and you already have the sheltering gap, you can take Concept of Operation Basics, Mass Care and Overview, Feeding Activity Introduction, and Feeding Fundamentals 2. The first three are also recommended just in general for shelter workers. But if you're a shelter worker and you have that gap, you only need one class to become a shelter. A feeding only needs one class to become a sheltering gap, and that's Shelter Fundamentals, and you can find that in Edge and take it online. All the sheltering people would love to have you as a feeding people part of sheltering, and I know that sheltering often fills in for feeding gaps people because we don't always have enough feeding volunteers. And that's me. I
Thank you.
think
Yes, thank you, Chris. That's great. And as everyone can tell, oops, we seem to be missing a slide there. But we will go at anyway. As you can see, sheltering and feeding work hand in hand. So, Angie, let me turn it over to you.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about logistics and feeding, how logistics works with the feeding and the sheltering team. So within logistics, we have facilities management, in-kind donations, fulfillment, sourcing, transportation, and warehousing.
Eway, can you go to the next slide? I think we have one out of order. My fault. There you go, Angie. We'll go back to
That's
the
okay.
DES.
Okay, now go back to DES. Thank you, Yue. So one of those is distribution of emergency supplies. To me, that's one of my favorites because you get to go out into the community. You get to drive an emergency response vehicle, which is an ERV or MERV. ERV being the emergency response vehicle, MERV being a mobile response vehicle, to various locations to distribute food, other items, shovels, all those cleanup kits and things. You go to points of entry to disaster area and the disaster recovery centers like the DRCs, the LACs, the MACs, or MARCs, I should say. I've also heard MACs. But and you get to travel with the DS team to hand out snacks and water. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Slide, please. Okay. One of the functions of logistics is facility management. Very important function because they actually help us in getting our building, our facility, where we're going to do our sheltering or our feeding. They make sure the facility is ADA compliant. They handle any facility repairs, not prior to us going into the building, but any kind of damage or that has occurred while we are in the facility. So they help do repairs during or after we are in the facility. They handle infrastructure needs, such as additional storage, or if we need additional bathrooms or porta potties, hand washing stations, and understand what parts of the kitchen can and cannot be used. When they go in and do their survey or their agreements, they go ahead and find out which areas we have access to. They may also request any additional facility use that we may need. If there's another area within that facility we can use, they'll request that for us as well. Next, mission response vehicle. Thank you, Mike. Sorry. Thank you, Mike, for that. He is our logistics lead person. In-kind donation tracks the donations, food items, and meals. Approves most food donations, not sitting around waiting for us to call them. I'm not sure what that means. I didn't put that in there, but they approve all the food items that come in that are donated. And on larger operations, they assist with pre-clearances for donors through the offers desk. Slide, please. And we have fulfillment. As a shelter worker, we love our fulfillment people. They're only activated at level 4 and above, but they can be activated sooner if it's approved by the job director. They delivers to clients and staff shelters only. And they usually deliver snacks, water, cold breakfast items, paper products, but they also deliver other items. There's actually a list on OneSource of the standard items that can be requested by the shelter workers. I can put that in the link in the chat if you'd like the link to that so that you can have access to that. And sometimes they are embedded at a shelter, which makes it very nice for our feeding and our sheltering teams, because then they don't have to leave the shelter to go out and purchase items. They can stay in the shelter while that fulfillment person goes out and does the actual shopping for us. Next slide, please. Next, we have sourcing. Sourcing used to be called supply and procurement. They find and order special items or equipments for feeding, like storage containers, refrigerators, bulk items. They get those bulk items maybe through Cisco. They track our 6409s and associated receipts, invoices from purchase cards, P cards. Yay. That's my favorite part. I'm not a big fan of doing the 6409s, but it's a necessary thing. But I'm glad that they track all of that for us. They receive purchases with mass care procurement cards or MCPC cards. 6409s and receipts, usually at the end of the deployment or for reload. So if you are one that is assigned an MCPC card during a deployment, at the end of your assignment, you would go ahead and do your 6409s, your logs, and your receipts and turn those all in at the end of your assignment. And they track all expenses, invoices, and purchase orders. Thanks, Yue. Next slide, please. Then we have transportation. They request and receive herbs and MERVs to the operation. They also are the ones that provide us our rental cars, our rental vehicles, our box trucks. They check in for operational soundness. They check all of our herbs and MERVs for that. They request refrigerated box trucks for kitchens. They regularly inspect vehicles, the NFL and mechanic, for inspections and repairs on big operations with 10 or more vehicles. So those are the large ones, the huge ones. They provide rental vehicles for volunteers. If you've ever been in the transportation field on a DR, truly a busy function. And I really applaud those that can keep track of all of our vehicles. Next slide, please. Continuing with our warehouse team. It is your fulfillment team on level 1s through 3. So normally they're the ones that will provide any types of items that you may need if it's lower than a 4. Delivers water, snacks to the shelters and other feeding supplies. They often prepare the feeding kits, inventory and restocking. And they store items we need for an operation like snacks and water in a warehouse operation. If you have not had a chance to visit the warehouse in your area, I highly recommend it. I enjoy working in the warehouse when I'm allowed to, when I can. I started out with the logistics team and then I moved over to sheltering mass care. Next slide, please. Mary, this is yours.
Yeah. Another group activity that we rely on so much is the Disaster Services Technology Group. And basically, that's exactly what they do. They provide all of the technology that's needed on the operation, and they make sure that we have good phone access. Because if you're in a remote or rural area, that can be an issue when you're trying to get in contact with a feeding vendor or someone. So they check out the laptops to us, they check out the phones, again, making sure we have really good connectivity. This is not just a feeding issue, it's important for feeding, but it's important for every other group activity, every other gap. And that's why I keep helping people understand that we can't do this alone. We work with all these other gaps. And the way we work with them is, again, through patience and kindness, because they're working with other people as well. Other people are trying to make sure they have phone access, especially sheltering to do the SCIA, the intake form. So this is an excellent example of how it's so important to make sure we're all working together. And again, through kindness and patience, disaster services technologies, very important. Next slide, please. Oh my goodness, probably from a feeding standpoint, most important are disaster health services and disaster mental health services. And again, you know what they provide for our clients and for headquarters. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but I am going to tell you that disaster health services is so in line with feeding in terms of making sure our volunteers, our clients, our staff are healthy and safe by providing safe food, encouraging hand washing constantly. Whether you're a level 2 or 3 DR or a level 7, those are super important things. Make sure cold food's cold, which we're going to talk about in next week. Hot food is hot, and that people are washing their hands before they go and get food from the food line. So again, another gap that we can't really do on our own. Health services is always there to support us and back us up. Next slide, please. External relations. Now, this is an interesting one that some people may say, oh, feeding doesn't work with external relations. That's something totally different. But I can tell you that there's so often from local governments, local governmental officials, the politicians, They always want to get involved. And usually they like to get involved in the feeding aspect. And they want, to donate some food, or they want to have someone who's on their board that owns a fast food franchise to donate food. And it can get very complicated and very difficult. So we rely on external relations to kind of work with those government officials, one, to determine any feeding request is appropriate or not. And then two, to help vet those requests to make sure that one, it's appropriate, two, they can handle. We don't want someone saying, oh, I can donate meals to you, and they can only donate 60 when you have 100 people in the shelter. So we really rely on external relations, and they work very closely with our community engagement partners, but we rely on them to kind of, how would I say this? Keep the local officials in line and not kind of stepping on top of the feeding people. So very important relationships in terms of communicating with them. And the other thing is our external relations people can help us in feeding, getting a cultural representative to address some feeding needs. If we are in a very highly populated cultural area, and we need help identifying where we can buy kosher food, because we have lots. We can reach out to our external relations people and they can find out. Now, of course, feeding managers can also reach out to the local synagogue and talk to the rabbi there and say, hey, where can we purchase a quantity of kosher food? But our in-house partner, if you will, external relations, can be extremely helpful in that area. And that takes pressure off the feeding and the sheltering people to, again, meet those needs of the clients. I think that's the last group that we've identified that feeding works strongly with. So let's, next slide, Iwe, I think that's it. Yes. So, and there's some contact information for the future. Before we go to the Q&A, I would like to add that we are currently looking for a co-lead for the Pacific Division feeding job. And if anyone is interested in being a co-lead, feel free to contact me, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Back to you, Iwe.
Thank you so much, Mary, Angie, and Chris for presenting. We do have several questions in the Q&A section. And if you have more questions, please feel free to put in the questions.
Iwe,
So
could you unmute Deborah and
yes.
Kay?
Yes.
They will be assisting as the panel of experts.
Great. Anyone else that you'd like to unmute?
If Mike Woods is still on the line, we did reach out to Dave Fromer with his help, but if Mike is still on the line, it would be good to unmute him in case we have a question we can't answer.
Of course. Just 1 second.
I'm putting him on the spot because he didn't know about that.
1 second. One more, then we are good. Okay, let's take a look. So Kay, Deb, and Mike, you have been unmuted and you're able to participate in our panel discussions. Okay, let's go with the first question earlier. Delia, if you can clarify your question in the Q&A section, I didn't fully understand what you meant. So next question is, who is responsible for counting the food given?
I can take that. So when food is delivered, we at the Red Cross are responsible for counting and reporting how much food is used, how much is served. So if it's individually packaged meals, that's pretty easy. You know that you have 100 delivered and you have 25 left over. Guess what? You served 75. And that report then goes up through through the chain of command. It goes actually into Skya now. No, actually, hang on. We have a new change there. So
you're right. It goes into Skya.
It goes into Skya, and then the feeding manager at HQ would then take those numbers and put them in WebEOC in the evening. That's new as of February 16th, I believe. So we are responsible for the shelter, feeding people at the shelter. If there isn't a feeding person at the shelter, then it has to be a shelter SA. But again, as you saw in the earlier slides, feeding SAs and sheltering SAs work so close together. A lot of their duties overlap. So it's a good thing that we both understand each other's jobs and job duties. So hopefully that answers your question. Yes, we are responsible for counting how many meals are served. Now, let's say it's being done cafeteria style. Well, you either have to count out the number of plates that you put out in advance. So you're going to put out 100 plates for people to go through the line. And then you can subtract the plates that are left. That's a pretty good way. You can also have someone with a little clicker at the front of the line, which is a really good thing, because that way, whether it's a feeding SA, sheltering SA, whoever it is, they get to talk with the clients. They get to smile. They get to say, how's your day going? I know it's been really rough out there. We're glad you're here. Here's a plate. Enjoy your meal tonight. So really making the experience not just like herding through, a cafeteria line. And then, at least in the Gold, I can only speak for Gold Country at this point, but we have little counters in our feeding boxes along with thermometers. But we have people just click a little number every time someone picks up a plate or goes through. It's really your choice how you want to do it. I like the personal contact. I don't want to just count out 100 plates or 125 plates and say, oh, I had 10 left. Okay, we served 115. That answer the question?
Joseph, you had your hand on earlier. Did you want to elaborate on your question? Okay, hearing none. Next question. Do you need a food server certificate to feed in the shelter?
You need the GAP, and you need the food safety class. You do not need a food handler certificate because we are not cooking food. We are serving food. And we're talking a lot about the precautions and what needs to be happening next week. The whole session is committed to food safety, and it's very, very enlightening.
Thank you. And Delia, I see your hand is up. I am going to unmute you for you to allow your mic. Delia, you want to come off mic?
Yes, I'm here. I tried to edit, but I couldn't do it. So I meant to say April, not spring. And also I would like to kind of train a little bit, going to a shelter.
Thank you. So, Mary and team, the question is, in order to feed in the shelter, do you need to wear an apron?
Yes. And it needs to be a disposable apron. Again, should be in the shelter supply kit. The problem with cloth aprons is if you're in a shelter and it gets dirty, how do you get it clean? Unless you're taking it to the laundromat after every shift. So several regions have very nice, pretty cloth aprons with their names on it, their region on it. And that's fine as long as you wear a plastic apron over that, or as long as you are washing it every night. But my recommendation is the plastic ones. And there's a question in there similar about wearing vests when you're cooking or when you're serving. You need to have an apron over your vest if you're serving, just like you wouldn't be wearing, and I don't want to go into a lot of this about necessarily, because a lot of this will be covered next week, but you can't wear your apron, disposable or otherwise, into the restroom and then come back out to the serving line. So you would have to take either a cloth apron or take the disposable apron off and get a new one. So my recommendation to everyone for safety's sake is definitely use a disposable apron.
Thank you.
And Mary, do we have a workaround if we do not have disposable apron?
The workaround is go to Walmart or Costco or any restaurant supply place. They have them. They come in boxes just like the plastic, just like your gloves, your serving gloves, and they're very inexpensive. That's why they're disposable plastic aprons.
Thank you. Next question is, could you share with us the different levels of DR and what determines the different levels?
Angie, do you want to take that one?
Actually, I was just looking this up in our ConOps.
Or we can pass it on to Deborah. She'll know that
Yeah.
instantly.
Deborah would.
Maybe not exactly instantly, but let me just tell Barbara just basically on how it goes. The levels are set by the amount of money that we anticipate we're going to be spending. So for example, a level 1, which would be basically usually your DAT calls are level 1. That would go up to $10,000. At $10,000 of estimated spending, we don't wait until we actually know the dollar amount. We're estimating when we're doing this leveling that goes on. Then it would become a level 2. And these levels increase on up until you're reaching about a level 7, which is, I think, $5 million plus. So that's basically how they're set. I know that you can go to OneSource under ConOps, which is where Angie was headed to look at each of the particular levels. But beyond the dollar amount of the levels, what really becomes important to it is that the complexity of the DR starts coming into play. And because of the complexity, that affects the amount of money, and then it affects how much we're going to be putting into it as far as people and everything else that goes on with it. I don't know, Barbara, if that really answers the question, but that's levels.
Thank you. And Barbara, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to put in the Q&A or the chat. Okay, next question. What about our event-based volunteers? Can they serve food and they might not be, taking the coursework for the basic food safety?
So we have had event-based volunteers serve food. And what happens in that situation is just like you get an orientation when you come on the job, if it's an event-based volunteer working in the food line, then either the feeding manager, the feeding SA, the shelter supervisor, someone needs to orient them to the basic food safety issues. Obviously, you wear gloves, here's your hairnet or your hat. You do not touch your face or any part of your body when you're serving food. If you do, you step away and you wash your hands and then re-glove, those kinds of things. So just like when someone comes on the job for the first time, they get a little orientation. This is what's happening. This is what we're doing. So yes, EVVs can serve food, but the person that's in charge of the feeding at the shelter, whatever their little title is responsible for making sure that they are doing that safely. And our new food safety video in EDGE, and remember, there's tons and tons of training in EDGE for us, but it's only 20 minutes. So if the person comes on the job and says, I'm an EBV and I'm here to help with lunch and dinner, and I look at my watch and it's only 10 o'clock, I'm going to sit them down and have them watch the little video. It's a very good video. It's 20 minutes. It's short and sweet. It doesn't go into all of the particulars about all the different types of foodborne viruses. It gives them the basic of how to serve food safely. So to answer the question, very long-winded, if you will, yes, EBVs can.
Thank you, Mary. And I'm going to circle back to the apron question. Do you need apron to serve snacks and drinks?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, not necessarily because everything's packaged already, but it's a nice thing to do. It shows our clients how much we care about their health and safety. I definitely would use both gloves and an apron if I was in charge of the snack table and handing out snacks. And the reason, even though they're completely closed and they're contained, people, packages can get dirty. And when I say get dirty, and again, we'll cover some of this next week. The norovirus can live on objects for a long time. So I want to make sure that my clients are wonderfully safe. I can tell you in LA, this is just an example. It happens other places. When we were doing the canteening at headquarters, we didn't let people even pour their own coffee. We had EBVs. They were in their aprons. They had their gloves. They had their hats on. They served the coffee for people. So if you can imagine, 150 people touching the little coffee dispenser spout, that's a lot of opportunity to spread some germs. So to answer the question again, kind of long-winded, I would. It's not necessarily a super requirement. And I can also tell you sometimes there aren't enough staff to do that. So you've had to spread the snacks out so that hopefully people are just touching one and picking it up. But it's really better if you have someone monitoring that.
Thank you, Mary. And we have multiple people that put in the financial levels, the actual description of, the dollar amount. So take a look at that. Okay, next question. Are shelter volunteers allowed to eat with the shelter clients?
Oh, not only allowed to eat with them, we encourage it. Please mix in. It's a great way to get to know your clients and to interact and to be able to meet together. Sharing a meal is very comforting for a lot of people, and it's a way for people to open up and talk about what's happening in their lives to you in a much more comfortable setting sometimes. So absolutely, please eat with your clients.
Yeah, I worked in a shelter once where it was certain people were assigned to meals to go eat with the clients so that they could talk to the clients and they could get to know them on a personal level, and they could get to find out how they were doing. So it is extremely important that you do, if you have a chance to, eat with clients.
And as a shelter supervisor, I second all of these things. It really helps.
Thank you so much, all. And it also helps the shelter resident transition team that if you find any information that is useful, so you can share across the board, even with disaster mental health, disaster health services, so they can all help the clients. Okay, we have next, not really a question, but more of a comment that for the SKYA report that we talked about earlier, Deborah mentioned that SKYA, they're going to ask you the number of meals served, so you're able to report there. I think one more question I see is that is there any pre-planning or coordination between the headquarters and also the field regarding feeding?
Which one of you guys want to take that one?
Oh, okay. So could you elaborate or reread the question or elaborate a little bit?
I'm interpreting the question. I think that's what the question meant. The original question seems just as more complex as the Army and Marine Corps troops do out in their field operations. How much pre-planning or coordination is done between American Red Cross and the military? So my interpretation is that they meant that headquarters versus the field team.
Well, I can only speak from my experience, and we do a lot of pre-planning. So in Blue Skies, we are doing lots to get our vendors set up, to get our contracts set up, not contracts, we don't have contracts, our agreements, our vendor agreements set up. Used to be MOUs for those of you that have been around a while. So there's a lot of pre-work that goes into feeding. Then when an incident happens and an operation starts up, there's a ton of communication that goes back and forth between the field, and I'm assuming you mean the shelter, but not necessarily just the shelter, because then we would have possibly other fixed feeding sites where people just come like to a park or someplace for the day to get food. They don't need shelter, but they don't have any way to cook because of whatever it was, a fire, a flood, a hurricane, whatever. And then obviously feeding headquarters for a while. So there is a lot of communication that goes back and forth, not only about what the needs are, but certainly about the numbers. For example, if we are ordering, let's say it's large enough, it's a 4, okay? I think that's the biggest, that's the lowest level of national. Let's say we're ordering food from headquarters, and we happen to be using a local vendor, not one of our partners. So we're ordering 100 meals, but you're reporting in Skya every night that we're only serving 60. So that communication then happens back with the shelter staff or the feeding staff at the shelter, like, hey, what's going on? We're only serving 60 people during the day, but we're ordering 100 meals, 100 breakfasts, 100 lunch, 100 dinners. Oh, well, we've got 40 people that are going to work every day. So that communication happens, or should be happening, back and forth every day. Now, let's say it's just a sec, Deb. Let's say it's one of our partners, like Salvation Army or Southern Baptist, California Southern Baptist, and they're cooking for us. We meet with those vendors, the HQ feeding people meet with those vendors every single morning, sometimes only for 10 minutes. Hey, how'd it go yesterday? Were you short? Did you have enough? Are we ordering too many, too few? All of that little communication in 10 minutes that we get back from Salvation Army or Southern Baptist or whoever it is, and then Mercy Chefs, and then we can make any adjustments we need to. So again, sorry about the long-windedness, but I want you to understand, because it's important that you understand what not only your job, but what's happening above you. So you have SVs and you have managers that are, I don't want to say jumping through all these hoops, but have a lot of balls in the air in terms of trying to make sure we have the right amount of food at the right time, the right place, and it's good quality, healthy food.
Thank you,
Add a little
Mary.
bit. I'm sorry, Yee-Wei, may I add to that a little bit?
Of course.
On some of our smaller DRs, our local DRs, I like to encourage the use of some of our local vendors, because during disasters, they may be closed down as well. And we can provide some income for them during the time that we are there in their community. And that helps them as well, and therefore helps the community. So I really encourage the use of local vendors to be used during our smaller DRs.
Thank you. We'll go to Delia first, then we'll go to James' question. Delia, you can come off mute and ask your question.
Yes, once I was in a shelter as a consequence of a apartment building fire. It happened that I sat on the table. I was sitting there on the table, and somebody came and was telling me that she knew who did the fire, who did, and what is one supposed to do in that situation?
Angie, do you want to answer that? Or Chris?
That happen that does actually happen. Someone will come up to you and say, I know who started the fire, or I know who did this, or just encourage them if they do they have knowledge to maybe contact their local law enforcement agency to give them the information if they're willing to do that.
To call the police, you mean, or the fire department?
Have them contact their local law enforcement or fire department so that they have all the evidence and information that they can get.
I would
Okay.
add to that to make sure to also report it to your supervisor so that they're aware of what is happening.
She was really serious and very adamant about me knowing that she knew who did this.
Thank you, Delia, and thank you all for
Thank
for
you.
your, how would I say, encouragement and guidance on contacting the local police and law enforcement and let the supervisor know. Okay, so we have two more questions that are similar. That is, can we explain the procedure of how the deployment in feeding goes? And how do we know that once we finish training, how do we sign up for those shifts or disasters?
All right. So James, on that one, to start with, as far as finding out about the deployments that are available, the important part to that is going on to Volunteer Connection and ensuring that you show availability in Volunteer Connection. That's underneath your profile in the disaster section. I don't have ability to look for it right now, but that's the main way that you end up getting called. Also, by letting your disaster workforce engagement lead know that you're interested in deploying. So the way that we know who is going to get called for major disasters and first to be called, if it is a disaster where we know it's going to happen, like a hurricane or something in that way, we have a set packet of the number of people that we're going to be putting out and calling to go out. And it really then is based on just a matter of, have you shown availability? And does your disaster workforce able to get that position for you off the door? Because workforce for the disaster operation is going to say, here's all the positions we need. They're going to put that out on a general board we call the door, saying these are all the people in the positions that we need. And then all the regions with their disaster workforce engagements people are going to pull from the people who show availability, and then they're going to take that and start calling and filling those positions. So it's kind of a matter of the best way if you want to go. I'm going to say this again, and I mean a dozen people, is make sure that you're marked available in Volunteer Connection.
Thank you so much, Deb. And before we go to the hand, I'd like to put Mike Wood on the spot. Mike, you are logistics, and feeding works greatly with logistics. Can you share with us some tips that you would like to see from the feeding team so we can help the feeding team better and can help logistics better?
Well, that's very interesting, Yue. I think when it comes to level 1s, 2s, and 3s, making sure that as things start, that there are 6409s put through to request things like breakfast items. We try in the Gold Country to embed a logistics person early on in the operation with the shelters. So it's not a true E3 or fulfillment operation, but it's our version of that beginning. Our disaster trailers have sufficient, I think, supplies in them to last the first 24 to 48 hours. In there, there's a feeding kit that does have aprons and gloves. As soon as you start to see that the number of people in your shelter increase, then you want to be putting through 6409s to get additional supplies. I think it's all about trying to think ahead and not necessarily get what you need tomorrow, but get what you may need for the next 3 to 5 days.
I am gonna ditto that. That was well said, Mike. It's that planning ahead and anticipating. And gosh, like I said in the beginning, the warehouse is not sitting around waiting for us to call them. They have other things to do. So if we can be proactive and looking ahead with those 6409s, with those orders, right on, Mike. That's great.
We're trying to think ahead too and go, okay, how big is this going? How big is this getting? Do we need to have more people in the field quicker than we now have? What are we going to need in the next 24 to 48 hours? And try and scale up as quickly as we can to make sure that the shelters are well taken care of, our shelters and our clients.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you so much, Mary. This is not really a question, but more of comment in the chat is that if you do not get contact by, when you're available and you're not contacted by the deployment team, please reach out to the deployment team. Sometimes, the position might not be open. Sometimes, that the order that they went by, that maybe someone else took the spot already. So reach out to your disaster workforce engagement team, like, most of the people that said in the chat. Okay, let's go to the question that Ingrid, let me have you come off mute. Ingrid, you had a question.
Yes, I had the question like, you need help next week, where you need help, and what day do you need help?
Okay, Ingrid, say that again so I understand the question.
I'm sorry because I have a bad reception. I'm working today, but I'm on the meeting. I would like to know, all the time I listen, you need help next week. What day do you need help? What day you need help for the feeding?
Oh, for the co-lead?
Uh-huh.
Oh, why don't we take that offline and you and I can talk after this?
Okay, perfect.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And Ingrid, I wanted to make sure that you're talking about the co-lead, but not the deployment, right?
Oh.
The email I got from you is for deployment. I just wanted to make sure we understand this correctly.
Yeah, yes, can be for both. I'm ready to help.
Got it.
It can be
Thank
for the
you.
colleague,
You're
it
ready
can
to
be
help. Great. We'll
for
pair you up with
deploy
Mary.
too.
Right. Okay. We'll pair you up with Mary, and we'll also find out which region you are. Then we can pair you up with your disaster workforce engagement team. Thank you
Okay.
so much. And Delia, I see your hand up again. Do you have another question?
Yes, it would be good if in the app, in the Volunteer Connection app, there was an icon that said volunteer for shelters, for sheltering, for feeding, for, all related to shelters. Just
Thank
a
you.
comment.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Anyway, we only have 2 minutes left, and there is I want to address, I'm not sure I can, but Connie asked, why are disposable aprons not on the list for approved shelter supplies? I didn't know they weren't. And again, I can only speak for my own personal experience, so I'll have to do some research on this because we've always had them. We just always have had them. So I don't know what list you're referring to, but I will look into that and have an answer next week.
Thank you, Mary. And we do have 1 minute left. Do we have any other questions? I think I just saw one pop up. Okay, the question is, where do you put your availability in Volunteer Connection?
So
There you
Deborah
go.
or Kay?
I
All
can
right,
take
I'm
that.
gonna,
Oh.
I don't know if someone is capable of sharing their screen. I can talk through it. But if you go to your volunteer connection and you go over into my profile and you look down over underneath the my profile, and then you go down under to where it says disaster cycle services.
Oh, someone's thank
I
you,
am
Yue.
sharing my
Oh,
screen,
Yue, thank you for doing that one.
but it's going to take a little while because it's not loading.
Okay.
Keep talking.
So
And
once
let's
she
see if
shows
this
you to
thing will
that, she's going to
load.
go to disaster cycle services, and then she's going to come down there to disaster responder availability on there.
One of the things that we should note is that you have to have a gap to be able to see disaster cycle services. So if you are a trainee or you have not gotten your first gap, you won't see disaster cycle services in the menu. So just know that, but as soon as you get your gap, that's exactly where it is.
Okay, so it is on the screen now. It's the disaster responder availability. So if you click edit, and you can put down your availabilities. And you can click whether it's local, region, state, division, we're in the Pacific Division, or if you want to do national, or if you only want to do virtual. Then after that, you can go ahead and save changes. And it'll pop up here. Or if you're not available, you can also click that you're not available, so then everyone else knows you're not available.
Excuse me, when I'm trying to put my ability for local and national, they not let me put national. They all the time put me like a local.
So I would recommend that you work with your workforce engagement person to see how that's going. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Oh, Chris, you have your hand up. We are 2 minutes over, so I want to be sure that we don't encroach on your evening. Chris, did you want to say something?
Yes, when you open up Volunteer Connection, next to your picture over on the right, there's also a place you can click that says for your availability. I don't have it up at the moment, but it skips going all the way through your profile.
So Vicky said there's a disaster DCS responder list that is under your profile. You click on that and you're able to see the disaster support services and for disaster responder availability. And we are 3 minutes over time. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Same time, same link. Thank you, everyone. Good night.